Chapter 10, Part 2 of A Wrinkle in Time. Now, she was able to look around a little, and everything she could see was rusty and gray. There were trees edging the field in which she lay, and their leaves were the same brown as the grass. There were plants that might have been flowers, except they were dull and gray. In contrast to the drabness of color, to the cold that numbed her, the air was filled with a delicate, spring like fragrance, almost imperceptible as she blew softly against her face. She looked at her father and Calvin. They were both in their shirt sleeves, and they looked perfectly comfortable. It was she, wrapped in their clothes, who was frozen too solid even to shiver. "Why am I so cold?" she asked. "Where's Charles Wallace?" They did not answer. "Father, where are we?" Mr. Murray looked at her soberly. "I don't know, Meg. I don't tesser very well. I must have overshot somehow. We're not on Camazotz. I don't know where we are. I think you're so cold because we went through the black thing, and I thought for a moment it was going to tear you away from me." "Is this a dark planet?" Slowly her tongue was beginning to thaw, and her words were less blurred. "I don't think so," Mr. Murray said, "but I know so little about anything that I can't be sure." "You shouldn't have tried to test her then." She had never spoken to her father in this way before. The words seemed hardly to be hers. Calvin looked at her, shaking his head. "It was the only thing to do. At least it got us off Camazotz." "Why did we go without Charles Wallace? Did we just leave him there?" The words were not really hers, coming out cold and accusing. "We didn't just leave," her father said. "Remember that the human brain is a very delicate organism, and it can be easily damaged." "See, Meg," Calvin crouched over her, tense and worried. "If your father had tried to yank Charles away when he tested us, and if it had been kept grabbing hold of Charles, it might have been too much for him, and we'd have lost him forever. And we had to do something right then." "Why?" "It was taking us. You and I were slipping, and if your father had gone on trying to help us, he wouldn't have been able to hold out much longer either." "You told him to Tesser?" Meg charged to Calvin. "There isn't any question of blame," Mr. Murray cut in severely. "Can you move yet?" All of Meg's faults were uppermost in her now, and they were no longer helping her. "Not and you'd better take me to no, and you'd better take me back to Camazotz and Charles Wallace quickly. You're supposed to be able to help." Disappointment was as dark and corrosive in her as the black thing. The ugly words tumbled from her cold lips even as she herself could not believe that it was to her father, her beloved, longed for father, that she was talking to in this way. If her tears had not still been frozen, they would have gushed from her eyes. She had found her father, and he had not made everything all right. Everything kept getting worse and worse. If the long search for her father ended, and he wasn't able to overcome all their difficulties, there was nothing to guarantee that it would all come out right in the end. There was nothing left to hope for. She was frozen, and Charles Wallace was being devoured by it, and her omnipotent father was doing nothing. She teetered on the seesaw of love and hate, and the black thing pushed her down into hate. "You don't even know where we are," she cried at her father. "We'll never see Mother or the twins again, and we don't know where Earth is or even where Camazotz is. We're lost in space. What are you going to do?" She did not realize that she was as much in the power of the black thing as Charles Wallace. Mr. Murray bent over her, massaging her cold fingers. She could not see his face. "My daughter, I am not a Mrs. Whatsit or a Mrs. Who or a Mrs. Which. Yes, Calvin has told me everything he could. I'm a human being, and a very fallible one. But I agree with Calvin. We were sent here for something, and we know that all things work together for good to those that love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." "The black thing!" Meg cried out at him. "Why did you let it almost get me?" "You've never tessered as well as the rest of us," Calvin reminded her. "It never bothered Charles and me as much as it did you." "He shouldn't have taken me then," Meg said, "till he learned to do it better." Neither her father nor Calvin spoke. Her father continued his gentle massage. Her fingers came back to her came back to life with tingling pain. "You're hurting me." "Well, then you're feeling again," her father said quietly. "I'm afraid it is going to hurt, Meg." The piercing pain moved slowly up her arms, began in her toes and legs. She started to cry out against her father when Calvin exclaimed, "Look!" Coming toward them, moving in silence across the brown grass, were three figures. What were they? On Uriel there had been the magnificent creatures. On Camazotz the inhabitants had at least resembled people. What were these three strange things approaching? They were all the same dull gray color as the flowers. If they hadn't walked upright, they would have seemed like animals. They moved directly toward the three human beings. They had 4 arms and far more than 5 fingers to each hand, and the fingers were not fingers, but long waving tentacles. They had heads and they had faces, but where the faces of the creatures on Uriel had seemed far more than human faces, these seemed far less. Where the features would normally have been, there were several indentations, and in place of ears and hair were more tentacles. They were tall, Meg realized as they came closer, far taller than any man. They had no eyes, just soft indentations. Meg's rigid, frozen body tried to shudder with terror, but instead of the shudder, all that came was pain, and she moaned. The things stood over them. They appeared to be looking down at them, except that they had no eyes with which to see. Mr. Murray continued to kneel by Meg, massaging her. "He's killed us, bringing us here," Meg thought. "I'll never see Charles Wallace again, or mother, or the twins." Calvin rose to his feet. He bowed to the beast as though they could see him. He said, "How do you do, sir, ma'am?" "Who are you?" the tallest of the beasts said. His voice was neither hostile nor welcoming, and it came not from the mouth-like indentations in the furry face, but from the waving tentacles. "They'll eat us," Meg thought wildly. They're making me hurt. My toes, my fingers, I hurt." Calvin answered the beast's questions. We're we're from Earth. I'm not sure how we got here. We've had an accident. Meg, this girl, is paralyzed. She can't move. She's terribly cold, and we think that's why she can't move." One of them came up to Meg and squatted down on its huge haunches beside her, and she felt utter loathing and revulsion as it reached out a tentacle to touch her face. But the tentacle came with the same delicate fragrance that moved across her with the breeze, and she felt a soft, tingling warmth go all through her that momentarily assuaged her pain. She suddenly felt sleepy. "I must look as strange to it as it looks to me," she thought drowsily, and then realized that with a shock that of course the beast couldn't see her at all. Nevertheless, a reassuring sense of safety flowed through her with the warmth which continued to seep deep into her as the beast touched her. Then it picked her up, cradling her in 2 of its 4 arms. Mr. Murray stood up quickly. "Well, what are you doing?" "Taking the child."